I've long wished to test my skills against a Greymane.
Over the past few years, PC games have been facing an optimization problem.
What say you?
Leaning heavily on upscaling solutions like NVIDIA's DLSS and AMD's FSR, developers have been releasing ultra-detailed games and hoping that these technologies will help mitigate the performance cost. Crimson Desert is a bit different though.
Now this here is one of my favorite spots.
While Crimson Desert is genuinely a beautiful, albeit buggy, game, developer Pearl Abyss announced super reasonable PC system requirements loading up to launch. So we wanted to see just how well the game would scale. And sure, Crimson Desert does struggle a little bit on low-end cards like the Radeon RX 6500 XT, but not by enough that switching on FSR doesn't bring it over that 60 FPS threshold. And once you get to the mid-range, Crimson Desert holds up as a game where upscaling serves its original purpose as an image quality and performance enhancement rather than a requirement.
True strength lies in humility.
To test the frame rate across all of these GPUs and handheld, our performance tester Jackie recorded performance while walking through Hernand Town. Is that how you say it? I don't know. And, well, for the most part, Pearl Abyss seems to underestimate the performance of its game.
I hope you live up to the legends.
I don't aim to disappoint.
The first thing that jumps out at you when looking at Crimson Desert's system requirements is how many generations of hardware were represented. The game has to be well optimized in order for such a wide range of hardware to be represented in Pearl Abyss's system requirements. So rather than running every GPU at the same settings, Jackie really wanted to test Crimson Desert's recommended settings for every graphics card. As such, she used this graphic as a guide, testing the graphics presets, resolution, and upscaling specifically called out. The problem though, is that the range of hardware was a little too broad. The game's requirements call out an AMD Ryzen 5 2600X at the low end, for instance, and the oldest CPU she had laying around with a motherboard that could run it is the Ryzen 5 7600, so she opted for that for the lower end build, swapping to the Ryzen 7 9800X3D, hell yeah, when she got to the higher end specs. That leaves us with the graphics cards. She does have most of the GPUs to test out most of Crimson Desert's performance tiers, with one exception. The minimum requirements call for an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060, and that GPU came out 10 years ago. But even without the exact GPU on hand to test the minimum specs, she was able to test the game on the Asus ROG Xbox Ally X. So for as popular as the Steam Deck is, Crimson Desert simply won't run on the Steam OS handheld right now. Instead, the only way to play Crimson Desert on a handheld right now is to run it on an Asus ROG Xbox Ally X or a similar Windows handheld. While that's a shame, the extra power of the Z2 Extreme would probably be needed to play this game anyways. Pearl Abyss recommends 3 different settings profiles for the Xbox Ally X: performance, balanced, and quality, with the former 2 leaning heavily on upscaling and frame generation. What is wild is that unlike the specs called out for desktop, these don't have a recommended graphics preset, but after testing it, you're gonna wanna stick with the minimum preset. Running Crimson Desert at 1080p with FSR set to quality, which will set the rendering resolution to 720p, you're gonna get 40 FPS, which is definitely playable, even if the minimum settings aren't the easiest on your eyes. You can turn on FSR frame generation to stretch the frame rate to 67 FPS, but we wouldn't actually recommend it. It might look visually smoother, but there is definitely some noticeable input lag there that doesn't make the game feel great, and that was just walking around in town. While Crimson Desert looks like it'd be the kind of game that cripples hardware, surprisingly easy to run as long as you have a decent graphics card. Jackie didn't have the GTX 1060 to test its absolute minimum spec, but she did have an AMD Radeon RX 6500 XT and was surprised that it was actually able to keep up and with better than Pearl Abyss's quoted performance. To be clear, rather than pairing the 6500 XT with the Ryzen 5 2600X Pearl Abyss calls for, she paired it with the Ryzen 5 7600, which is significantly faster, but the low-end GPU still managed to average 40 FPS at low settings at 1080p, and that is without upscaling too. When she enabled FSR on the balanced preset, which renders the game at 635p, she was able to get 53 FPS out of it, getting it closer to that 60 FPS sweet spot. The AMD Radeon RX 6700 XT is the first card that Pearl Abyss says can hit 60 FPS with the medium preset at 1080p. And at least in the little laps around Hernantown, the 6700 absolutely hits that mark, averaging 65 FPS over the 1 minute lap. You can buy yourself more breathing room with FSR though, which will bring your average FPS up to 83 FPS when you set it to the balanced option. This is also the first preset that turns ray tracing on, and even with a pretty accessible graphics card, has no problem clearing 60 FPS. Moving on to the NVIDIA RTX 4070, and we are off to a new resolution. 1440p, let's go! Brr, brr, brr. Setting it to the high preset, the game starts looking incredible. And with this last generation mid-range GPU, Crimson Desert averages 75 FPS without any kind of upscaling. With the AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT, the developer claims you should be able to run the game at 60 FPS with the Ultra preset at a native 4K. In the loop around Hernantown, the Radeon RX 9070 XT managed to just hit that level, averaging 62 FPS. However, once we turned FSR to performance to render the game at 1080p and upscale back up to 4K, the 9070 XT was able to get a solid 75 FPS. Jackie didn't have an RTX 5070 Ti on hand to directly test against the Radeon RX 9070 XT, but with the same settings, the RTX 5080 got 74 FPS in the same loop, which falls in line with what we'd expect from NVIDIA's penultimate graphics card. There is a graphics preset above Ultra, though it doesn't have a recommended graphics card in Pearl Abyss's recommended specs. The cinematic preset bumps almost all settings all the way up except for lighting, which has a max setting above it. To test this, Jackie put in an RTX 5090, let's go, and at 4K with no DLSS, she was able to get an average of 95 FPS. Then of course, you can turn on DLSS and frame generation to get up to 338 FPS with the same quality settings. What the With how well Crimson Desert runs on pretty much every graphics card we tested, it might end up being one of the most well-optimized PC games in years. That is in spite of the vast view distances and incredible lighting on offer. Pretty much every modern graphics card will be able to run Crimson Desert without any kind of upscaling. Of course, DLSS and FSR are both supported, which can make the game run even better without really impacting the visual quality of the game. Even on the Xbox Ally X, which is significantly weaker than any of the desktop graphics cards we tested, Crimson Desert runs just fine. It's not going to fully saturate the handheld's 144Hz display, but it doesn't really need to. It is still a great way to play the game when you're away from your PC or your Xbox. Now Pearl Abyss just needs to figure out how to get the game running on SteamOS and Bazite. Of course, just because Crimson Desert is optimized to run well on a wide swath of PCs doesn't mean that it's not also chock full of bugs and other quirks. For more on that, check out our review of the game, or for more performance testing, we've got an analysis of Resident Evil Requiem on PS5 versus PC.
It was a good match, Greymane.
And for everything else in the world of games and tech, keep it right here on IGN.
You're not bad yourself.
The world is vast, and there are many who are stronger still.